The more the truth stabilizes in your experience, the more it becomes possible for you to be a witness to your life instead of living in your head. To see things as they are, to see what's really happening instead of what you think about it. What you think about it drives you crazy. So why keep depending on that when you can actually be awake and alive and aware and present to what's happening and just see it for what it is, instead of interpreting it all the time and then finding yourself troubled by your interpretation. Most of what people worry about, they can't do anything about. But they worry about it as if they can. That's stupidity. That's insanity, right? So when you begin to practice this, you start to wake up to reality and you start to realize there's no need to wake up in the morning and act as if you're in hell. Instead of see, if you wake up in the morning and you're actually awake you're actually being what you are, then the only thing you experience is gratitude. That you woke up, and you don't even know how that happened. And you don't even know what happened in your body all night while it was asleep, right? That's one of the things one of the Zen teachers said. When you wake up, I think it was quoted in David Radin's new book, he was quoting his teacher. His teacher said to him, do you wake up in the morning? Or how do you wake up in the morning? Something like that, When we wake up in the morning, you're either waking up to be a witness of a miracle or you're waking up in hell. That's what they mean when they say the kingdom of heaven is on earth, right? Or if you're interested in Buddhism, they say nirvana is samsara. Samsara is a word that means the ordinary way that life is, the crazy world, right? And then they turn around and say enlightenment or nirvana, freedom from all of that, is that. Now that's not something you can figure out, but it's something that if you start to wake up, it becomes obvious to you. That this very world that we're in, that appears to be going down the drain, at this point it seems like it's swirling, doesn't it? Heading toward the drain, right? That this very world that we're in that looks like that is actually heaven. It's actually heaven. But it's only heaven for who you really are. It's not heaven for who you think you are, it is truly hell. Because for who you think you are, you're a little separate self in this big wide world, right, that has all these forces and atomic bombs and crazy politicians, and shooters and all the crazy shit you see on the news, right? Every day you look at that stuff, right? That's what appears to be the world, right? But the way it's occurring to you is occurring to you that way because you take yourself to be a physical body and separate from the rest of it, right? And once you're in that state, you're in a survival state, right? Because you're trying to get through the day, through the week, through the year, through your life as a physical body and a personality because you experience being under threat all the time. When you're driving your car, you're under threat, When you're walking around, you're under threat, Somebody could jump out any minute and kill you, right? You don't think about that, right? But I promise you the system that you're living in does. The system that you're living in is a survival system, and that's why your nervous system is out of balance all day long. The nervous system is out of balance. The sympathetic aspect of it is out of balance with the asympathetic aspect of it. When you're in the asympathetic aspect of it, the body's in a balanced state and it's operating at optimal operation, which is very seldom for most people, right? For most of us, it's out of sync, and the sympathetic aspect of it is out of sync because we're in this state of concern. We're in this state of preparation to fight or run all the time. And it's such a constant state of being in that state of to fight or run that we don't see it. It's called normal. But the way the proof that it's there, right? Somebody doesn't have to say much to you to ignite that. Right? It's right there. It's right there, right? If you're driving your car, you can see it's right there. Somebody cuts you off, right? And if you had a gun in your car, you'd grab it, right? It's right there. It's right there because it's running all day long and it's keeping your muscles tense, right? It's keeping your mind crazy worrying about what? The past and the future. If you're in a survival mode, you're worried about what did happen and what might happen. And then you live in the middle of that all day long, right? Hoping that you can distract yourself enough from that feeling of being uneasy to be able to enjoy your life. You know, and most people find they can't, so that they call the doctor, get a script so I can enjoy my life. And then they take that script for a while, and it helped. Maybe if I have a glass of wine with it. You see how it goes? Maybe if I have a glass of wine with it, have something to eat that's too fattening and destroying my body, take the medication, and watch TV. Maybe that'll work, right? You do that for a while, and then that's not enough. And you think, what else can I add to this mixture, right? What else can I add to this cocktail that I have to take every day so I can be relaxed enough to feel like I'm not miserable? So meditation is a way of approaching the situation you find yourself in that can produce the results that you really want in a natural way, right? In a natural way. So that you begin to understand that what you're suffering from is the activity of the mind, right? And when the activity of the mind gets intense, right? When the worry gets intense, when the physical sensations get too painful, when the memories are bothering you, the trauma's bothering you, when you're thinking about the next election and that's making you crazy, whatever it is, right? It's all making you crazy. It's happening in the mind. And the mind, when the mind gets crazy, it's attempting to get your attention. Just like when the body experiences pain, it's attempting to get your attention, isn't it? It's trying to tell you something's wrong here. Pay attention to this. See if you can do something to correct it. The mind is doing the same thing. When it's going crazy, it's asking you to be with it, like a child. It's asking you to be with it, right? If you ignore, what most people do is they try and ignore it, they try and sedate it, they try and tranquilize it, they try and distract themselves from it, right? And all that does is make it worse. Anything that you resist or reject, you give the power to disturb you. And if you reject it, if you resist and reject your emotions, or if you resist and reject your thoughts, if you resist and reject your mind, you're giving the mind the power to drive you crazy. You're giving the mind the power to disturb you. If you just naturally look at the mind and have a natural understanding of what's going on, it's asking for attention. And all you have to do with the mind to train it to be calm, all you have to do with the mind for the mind to leave you alone is be with it. Just be aware of it, that's all. Don't try and change it. Don't resist it. Don't try and fix it. Don't try and correct it. Just be aware of it. If you're aware of the mind, it's like a parent being with a child that's upset. And the parent says to the child, "What's wrong? Tell me what's wrong." And the child starts to talk about what's bothering them. And they might start to cry, right? And you just keep listening, letting them know you're here, reassuring them that it's okay. And then when they're done telling you, when they're done emoting, when they're done experiencing their feelings, they're relieved. Right? That's the way you want to relate to your mind. This is free advice, no charge, right? But you can't do that, you can't be that way with your mind unless you practice meditation sufficiently to relax the physical body and allow the mind to get calm enough, right? So the possibility of your being the awareness of the mind shows up. You can't be with the mind if you're in the mind. It's like, I think it was Einstein that said, you can't solve a problem from within the same problem. You got to get outside the problem, You know that saying, think outside the box, right? The one thing that they don't tell you is thinking is the box. And so if you want to think outside the box, you have to understand that it's a trick question. Thinking is the box. You can be outside the box, but you can't think outside the box. And if you're being outside the box, you're being the awareness of what's in the box, right? You're watching what's happening in the mind instead of being tortured by it. That's a whole different experience. Takes practice, because until you're sufficiently practiced, it'll suck you in, doesn't it? It'll suck you. Something happens that's upsetting and the mind starts going crazy, right? And it pulls your attention into it, and then you're in the mind having all these crazy thoughts. Oh, what about this and what about that? And what am I going to do? How do I fix this? How do I change it? How do I get away from this, right? That's the daily life of most human beings, right? They keep it to themselves because they don't want anybody to know. You don't want anybody to know what's going on in your YouTube, in your Me Tube. Because if they knew, they'd stay away from you. If you could get away from it, you'd stay away from it yourself, right? But the solution to it is not to get away from it. The solution to it is to love it. Because your true nature is love. And that can be an experience you're having if you practice meditation consistently over time, right? If you repeat it, that's how you got to where you are, right? Didn't you? You know, when you were a little kid, 18 months or 2 years old, somebody said, okay, here's your name. That's your body, right? And then the voice in your head started to play. Oh, here I am. That's my name, right? And it goes on from there. But how does it get stabilized in your brain and become who you are? Repetition. Repetition. Every day you get up and your parents call you by that name again. And then they send you to school and they pin your name on your shirt in case you forget it. Right? But it won't be long before you don't have to do that. Right? It's just like your house when you were a kid. I remember my stepson when he was a little kid and we used to go in the car. He used to say, do you know how to get back? That's a little kid's mind, right? But you don't have to think about how to get back to your house anymore. You repeated that so many times you couldn't forget it if you tried. Right? Once you get older, you know, you might start to experience some problems with that. Then you have to go back to writing it down again. Well, as you continue to practice meditation, what will gradually happen is there won't be an outside. There won't be an outside. You move from duality to non-duality. In the beginning, when you begin to practice meditation, it's me and the universe. Right? After you practice sufficiently for a period of time, it's the universe. That's non-duality. There is no outside. There is no other people. That's all awareness manifesting itself. That's all it is. Now, if you're a typical person, that statement I just made makes no sense. Right? But if you practice these practices and you do it the way it's meant to be done over time, a statement like that will be obvious to you. It'll just be obvious to you. So, my answer to you is practice. And you'll see it directly instead of just believing what I tell you. Practice and you'll see it directly. The other thing that I want to mention here is I talk in this class about two different kinds of practices, right? I talk about the formal practice, right? The one we just did, that's formal, right? You're not doing anything but meditation when you do the formal practice, right? That's one practice. When you start to get your feet wet with that and you start to get a taste of what you're doing, then you can start to do what's called the informal practice. And Candace O'Denver is the teacher of that. You can look her up on YouTube, right? But the informal practice means that now, as you go through your daily life, as you're involved in your activities, you start to drop into awareness for brief moments, as often as possible. Just drop into awareness. But now you're doing it while you're living your life. So you can get the hang of being yourself. That's how you get the hang of being yourself, is to practice being the awareness in action, being the action figure. Do it while you're driving your car. Do it while you're talking to somebody, right? This is like balance riding a bike. If you ride a bike, you go back and forth, but at some point you discover balance, right? In the same way, if you practice informally, at some point you discover your ability to be awake and aware while you're having thoughts, to be awake and aware while you're experiencing emotions, to be awake and aware while you're interacting with other people, right? This is now your true nature coming online. This is your true nature showing up in your life. That's where it's going to matter. Now I'm going to introduce the third thing, right? One of the most famous teachers of consciousness, his name was Ramana Maharshi, an Indian guy. When he began to teach people about the truth, he was awake. When he woke up when he was a teenager. It just happened. It happens like that sometimes because you're already who you are and you're already awake. You just don't know it, right? So you might just bang your head and wake up. Right? His father died unexpectedly and it was a big shock. So that shock shook him out of his personality and he woke up. He became one of the most famous teachers of our time in consciousness, right? And in the beginning, when he was teaching his devotees, he would just sit and be in a state of being. He would just sit and be in a state of being. And there were some people that could come and sit in front of him, and as soon as they looked at him, they woke up. Right? Not a lot of people, but some people, all they had to do was hear the truth or see him and they woke up, right? Most of us aren't that fortunate, okay? The other people said to him at some point, it's not working for me. Is there anything else you can do, right? And finally he conceded and he said, okay, here's what you can do. You can practice what he called self-inquiry. Self-inquiry. It's a very powerful practice if you do it correctly, okay? And what it is as you're going through your daily life, right? And you train yourself to notice when you get upset, or you train yourself to notice when something's not right, which means that'll be a lot of the time. And when you notice that you're upset or something's not right, do the practice of self-inquiry. The practice of self-inquiry, as soon as you're aware that something is going on in the mind, right, that is disturbing or upsetting, right, ask yourself, who am I? And when you ask, to do this technique, you don't just ask yourself, who am I? But when you ask that question, you experience your attention going back to its source. That's the technique. If you do this a lot of the time during the day, you will keep touching the reality of what you are. That's the thing. When you're doing, if you do informal meditation during the day, that's what you're doing too, right? If during the day, as many times as possible, as you just drop your attention to rest as awareness for a brief moment, that's touching the reality of who you are. In the same way, if something is disturbing to you and you just ask yourself, well, who am I? You see, if you're asking yourself, who am I, you're challenging your mind, because your mind takes you to be your body and your personality. So if you say, who am I, instead of just going along with what's happening in the mind, and then you do the inquiry, which means your attention turns around and goes back to its source. And you just experience that. One of the ways that this was described in one of the sutras, one of the wisdom teachings, is you can actually imagine an archer with a bow shooting a bow back into your true nature, so that the arrow lands on your true nature as awareness itself. It's just a way of describing it, right? But the idea is you're going to touch your true nature as many times as you can during the day. If you're doing formal practice every day, and then you start doing the informal practice, and then you practice the self-inquiry, how can you fail? How can you possibly fail? You know, if you take a line, say that line that you draw on a piece of paper is your everyday ordinary state of mind, right? And then you take that white stuff that you use to correct, right? And you start taking that white stuff and you start doing across that line. Do you see eventually the line's going to disappear? And what will be left is your true nature? It's inevitable. It's inevitable. There's no other way it could go. There's no place you can go other than to experience what you already are. That should be obvious, right? How can it be any other way? Right? So you're not practicing meditation to realize your true nature. You're practicing meditation to calm the mind and relax the body, so the true nature is not hidden. It's not hidden behind your thinking. It's not hidden behind the personality. So if you hear what I'm saying, you're hearing that I'm talking to you about a way of experiencing your life so that you can be happy, peaceful, and fulfilled and satisfied. But you've been practicing being a separate self in a body for years, right? So you have to make the dedication to doing the repetitive practice every single day until you get free from the effects of that practice you've been doing for years. And now we have brain science to prove that this is true. You know, the neuroscience that we have now shows us through these brain scans that are being done on meditators, right? That if you do what I've been talking about here, your brain will change in very dramatic ways. And as it changes, the thinking will change. As it changes, there'll be a lot less noise going on up there. And when stuff comes up where it starts to get noisy, right, you can simply go to the awareness. Yeah, the awareness is always the same. It never changes. It's always still. It's always stable. It's always satisfied. It's always happy. It's always the same, right? The mind is always different. It's always different, right? You know, some people who wake up, they say, I used to be different, but now I'm the same, right? The mind is always changing. It's an activity. The self is never changing. It's not an activity. You see the difference? Questions? So it's up to you. You know, you're the captain of your ship. You know, you can either keep sailing in the stormy weather, right? Or you could start to do this practice, and if you stick with it over time, you can't fail. I've been saying recently, the only thing that will determine whether you succeed or not is whether you persist. That's the only factor, whether you persist.